Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that doesn't just get you any old job, but a great job. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, July 18th, and welcome to episode number 77. How are transfer students evaluated? In this week's news, colleges mine data on their applicants. And we're in chapter 77 of 171 answers, and we discuss how admission offices evaluate applicants who are transferring from another college. And this week's question asks how students that graduate a year early from high school are viewed by colleges. And Mark continues his interview with admissions dean Greg Roberts as they transition into understanding the University of Virginia.
Friends, we announced a couple weeks ago that I had written an ebook. I really just compiled some of my favorite quotes, actually 33 quotes from admission leaders about different parts of the college process. And we said, I actually did that as my gift to you guys for putting your time in and listening to the podcast. And all you have to do is send us an email at questions@yourcollegeboundkid, and we'll send you off the ebook. We got really good feedback from that. So just want to remind you, if you're driving the first time, or maybe you did just listening for the first time, we got a really nice book as a gift to you for being a listener. And all you have to do is shoot us an email and say, send me the quotes, and we'll get it off to you within 24 hours. Okay, listeners. We have a whole new countdown, and you know I'm with the countdown queen who loves the countdowns.
I do.
And so in discussing with her what we're going to do next, we came up with a real lighthearted one that Anika likes. So if she likes it, I hope you guys like it. And it's based on a study that was done as to why people unsubscribe to podcasts, why they fire the podcast. And the 12 reasons are listed in order from the one that was least suggested to the most. So the number 12 reason why people say, no more for me in this podcast. Too much swearing.
Ooh, who is... Oh, wait. I am listening to one that swears a lot. And they are annoying. And I haven't listened to them in a couple weeks. Oh, my God.
I'm telling you. Now, you guys know this is my pet peeve. You know I'm a swear snob. I can't have very little tolerance from it. I think it's just I grew up in a household where, oh my God, I don't even know what would happen to me if I use that kind of language. I just shudder thinking of it. But I really like this Bill Simmons basketball podcast. But I can't every other word's the F-bomb. I can't deal with it. So this would have been my number one, Anika, probably. So it's up there.
It is very, very. No, that is so hilarious. I promise you. And it was a good podcast, but they were just cursing left and right. Now I do curse. I do swear, folks. I'm sorry. I do. I'm trying to cut back. I made a conscious effort actually a couple of years ago. I was like, you know what, I just can't do it. But it's still a work in progress.
Well,
but yeah, I see that. Okay. Number 12. There we go.
Too much swearing. But you know what? Nobody can accuse us of that.
Yep. Not yet.
Not on the podcast, at least, right? Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article entitled Colleges Mine Data on Their Applicants. And this is written by Mr. Douglas Belkin. And he wrote it in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. So yes, Mark, yes, colleges are technically sophisticated in the way that they are tracking the online activity of prospective students to evaluate their demonstrated interest in schools. So Mr. Belkin goes on to talk about how these schools are doing this in such a way that, and we've talked about this before a few times, but it was a nice reminder on, they're tracking how fast you open your emails, how many clicks you make, how long you actually spend time reading the content, which is kind of crazy. So students, please don't reply yes to any electronic invitation from the school and don't show up, because there's a chance that the school is tracking that. And according to Mr. Belkin as well, some schools, especially specifically in the case of, I think he said Seton Hall University in New Jersey, they have a scoring system based on a student's online activity to rate their demonstrated interest. So The reason behind all of this, he's saying, is that the whole data mining rise came from the Common Application when they started allowing the Common App comes out. These kids are easily able to apply to so many more schools, which in turn impacted the yield rate for many schools. And we know yield is how many students who are accepted into a school actually enroll in that school. So, admissions officers are saying that the information on demonstrated interest is generally used in deciding on borderline candidates. And they do, in some cases, or in some info sessions or on their websites, they do explain that it's part of their admissions process. Now, in come the privacy advocates voicing their concern about this is a way that students are being taken advantage of. But Mark, I'm not necessarily sure how that's taking advantage of students, but what say you, my friend?
All right. So, I got my mojo last week because not only did I read, but you told me the reading was okay. So now I'm like pushing my limits on you. Because this time I want to read the whole article. But before you say no,
Mark.
listen. One, it's shorter than what I read last time, and you said that was okay. And then I just think this is a really good article. And so I want to just read it. And then afterward, you can tell me if it was too much.
You get a pass.
Okay.
We'll give you a pass.
Right. So let me read it, and then I'll answer your question. All right. So this is Douglas Belkin, Wall Street Journal, very good writer. Some colleges, in an effort to sort through a growing number of applications, are quietly tracking prospective students' online interaction with the schools and considering it in deciding who they want to admit. Enrollment officers at institutions, including Seton Hall, Quinnipiac, and Dickinson, know down to the second when a student opens an email from the school. They know how long they spent reading the email, and they know whether they clicked through any of the links. Boston University knows if prospective students RSVP'd online to an event, and they know if they didn't show up. Schools use this information to help determine what they call demonstrated interest, or how much consideration an applicant is giving to their school. Demonstrated interest is becoming increasingly important as colleges face a rising number of applications, and they want to protect or improve their yields, the percentage of accepted students who enroll. Gregory Eichhorn, the VP of Admissions at Quinnipiac in Hamden, Connecticut, said the technological sophistication of the analysis has ramped up considerably. If we ask someone for an interview, we look at how they respond, how quickly they respond, or if they don't respond, says Eichhorn. It helps us to make a decision about that student. At Seton Hall in South Orange, New Jersey, students receive a score between 1 and 100 that reflects their demonstrated interest, says Alyssa McLeod, VP of Enrollment Management. The score includes 80 variables, including how long they spent on the school's website, whether they opened emails, and at what point in high school they started looking on the website. The earlier they look, the more points they get, the better. Many students have no idea that they are being tracked or to what extent they're being tracked. Demonstrated interest started becoming important about a decade ago when the growth of the Common App, which allows students to apply to more schools with little additional effort. Schools saw a rise in their applicants, but a drop in their yield among accepted students. Yield fell among four-year private, not-for-profit colleges from 34.5% to 34.5% in 2017 from 49% in 2003, according to the Wall Street Journal analysis of federal data. And the way I explain it to people on this, Anika, is basically 15 years ago, colleges got 1 out of every 2 kids they admitted. They accepted. So they accept 2, they would get 1. Now it's very close to 1 in 3. 34.5% is 33.3 would be a third, right? So that's a massive problem. Before you had to take, you could put 2 offers out and get 1, and now you got to put 3 offers out to get 1. Anyway, a drop can hurt a school's reputation and make filling its class a real challenge. And I would add that the bigger factor by far is that filling the class being a challenge is a much, much, much bigger factor than it hurting the school's reputation. So the bigger factor by far is filling the class being a challenge. A drop can hurt its reputation. It's only the nerd geek admission types that track yield and look at yield and study that I mean, 99% of applicants don't even know what yield is, or certainly what the yield numbers are. So the biggest challenge is filling the class, under enrolling and over enrolling, and having to get it right. So goes on to say, see, this is my little tactic, because I know that you don't like me reading so much. I like break it up with a little commentary. So it's like,
Nice. Thank you.
it's all intentional here. In 2017, 37% of 493 schools surveyed by the National Association of College Admission Counseling said they considered demonstrated interest to be of moderate importance, which is on par with how many said that teacher recommendations and class rank and extracurricular activities were important. It carries less weight than grades, and less weight than rigor, and less weight than test scores. But basically, according to the NACAC survey, equal weight with teacher recs, class rank, and extracurriculars. And I'll comment more on that later. Admission officers say information on demonstrated interest is generally used to decide on borderline candidates. Some schools explain on their websites or during their information session that demonstrated interest, or DI, is considered part of their admission process. We tell students it's important to establish a relationship, said Kelly Walter, the Dean of Admission at Boston University, one of the schools that uses demonstrated interest. Colleges also have low-tech means to help determine demonstrated interest. Last year, 1/3 of students who applied to American University either visited its Washington, D.C. campus or attended an information session about the school, says Andrea Fisher, the Assistant Vice Provost of Undergraduate Admissions. 2/3 of those admitted took part in either the campus tour or the on-site information session. Basically, what she's saying here is that's one way they're testing demonstrated interest. Did you come to an information session either at our campus or when we were traveling in your city? And I don't want to get ahead about this, but last week when I was in Boston at Harvard Summer Institute, I had dinner with an American University representative, and he talked at length about how to use demonstrated interest in their process. Anyway, it is certainly a factor in our decision, Ms. Felder said. It helps us in predicting which students are likely to enroll. Schools can buy software that tracks data on prospective students. Among the largest provider is Techno Solutions, Inc., the company of Chief Executive Alexandra Clark says its product Slate, which we've talked about on here a few times. Remember us talking about Slate before, Anika? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It generates dashboards summarizing, check this out, thousands of data points on each student, and it is used by over 850 schools. And last week I was in a group, and they said, how many people are using Slate? And I was the only non-college and admissions person in that session. And probably 75% of the hands went up in the room, said they were using Slate. Privacy advocates voiced concern that students were being taken advantage of. This feels pretty creepy to me. It raises very significant privacy concerns. It feels like surveillance, and I don't think it's healthy for schools to do it, said James Steyer, founder and CEO of Common Sense Media, a California-based nonprofit group that advocates for privacy online. Universities should not take privacy rights for granted. This seems like something Facebook would do, not a university. Mary Ethington, an independent college counselor outside of Chicago, tells students to relax, assume the web traffic with the school is being monitored, and to open every email from the college as if it were a homework assignment. The anxiety comes from not knowing whether a school tracks or doesn't track, she said. We just want schools to be transparent. Mary Hinton, a senior at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, says she benefited from demonstrated interest without even knowing it. After she toured Dickinson in high school, she sent them a thank you note to the tour guide at her mother's suggestion. Anika, the mother's suggestion. Something you would do. Got that one, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Now, a tour guide herself, Miss Hinton, has learned that those notes are forwarded from the tour guides to the admission officers. Her advice to prospective students about thank you notes, write them. It just takes a minute, and it can make a difference. Kathy Davenport, Dickinson Dean of Admissions, said such information is part of our holistic admissions review. From my perspective, you cannot isolate one variable. It's very complicated. No one size fits all. So that's the article. And I spent so much time reading that I forgot your question. Unless you have any more comments from what I read.
Nope, I sure don't. No, I'm just kidding. No, it is a great article. You are banned from reading articles for the rest of the month. It is.
You can say that if it's like the 28th of the month, because the rest of the month will be
No. It is where
I'm banned.
yes.
Okay.
But it was a great article. And yes, students, your stuff is being tracked. But no, you didn't answer my question because about
Okay.
the whole privacy group saying, this is they say the kids are being taken advantage of. Like how are they quantified being taken advantage of? I don't
Yeah.
get that.
So I totally get this. Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. And let me say something. So I had conversations with two different directors of admission. One was very recently, within the last 30 days, and the other one was more like about 14 months ago, that both told me, Mark, we do this, but I feel really uncomfortable doing this. Like if kids actually knew what we were tracking, it's like, so interesting thing about the article is, and one thing I like about a lot of Wall Street Journal articles, and New York Times, other places do this as well, is there's like the responses are recorded, right? They come in from everybody. And so, here's a response from Sarah from Houston. She said this, measuring the speed of response to an email is ridiculous. Maybe the kid had violin practice. Maybe the kid had swim team practice and had 3 hours of homework and is focused on what is really important to him now. So that was like one response from somebody that wrote in. There's another one here that I kind of really liked as well. That came in from another reader. Let me read this. As a high school senior who is waiting to hear back from colleges like Columbia, Duke, and Yale, I already experienced enough good old-fashioned stress. I don't need this high-tech variety too. My peers and I are tired of being subjected to the mysterious whims of those data-hungry institutions whose invasions have now apparently extended into our personal digital activities. Colleges need to step back and respect prospective students' privacy. In fact, demonstrated interest should not be a criteria for admission at all. We already are under enough pressure to earn a perfect GPA, be the president of 5 clubs, volunteer in the library. We shouldn't also have to worry about looking interested online, especially without our explicit consent for them to track us this way. If a student is worthy of admission, he or she ought to be admitted, period. Low yield is the school's problem. It's not ours. In fact, one could argue it is the problem they caused. I didn't apply to 11 schools for giggles. The uncertainty of the college admission process necessitated that. So, I rebel. You said don't read it. I read more, but I just thought those were good answers.
Yeah, that second one was really good. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, good. Just making sure you're not passive aggressively mad at me over there. But I think it has to do with a lot of things. Like one is at what point do I have privacy versus every little thing I do, you're monitoring and manipulating and using in ways that make me feel extremely uncomfortable. It does add a tremendous amount of stress to the process. I know a student that I'm working with now. they feel compelled to open every single email and every single thing. Like, this just adds a lot to the stress. So, I mean, I think you're comfortable. You're more comfortable with it than most people are, Anika. Most people do not like this at all.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm a big fan of it. I just know that I feel like we're in a society now where everything's being tracked, and we get that now. So how is it different from admissions? Like, you're being tracked somewhere else. You're being tracked by the amount of TV that you watch. You're being tracked by how many people watched the BET Awards last week. I mean, all of that stuff is being tracked. So that's
Well,
right.
you remember the pushback on Facebook for doing all this stuff. Like, people don't like, Big Brother invading every aspect of what you do. And also it can lead to erroneous conclusions. So that's another reason why people don't like it. Like, not only can it feel like an invasion of privacy, but it can, like, an example was that person who said, how do you know I didn't have a 3-hour exam? I didn't have soccer practice. So it took me 5 hours to open that. So now you're concluding making an erroneous conclusion off of really, so that I totally understand it. There are a couple things I want to say, though. Not every school's doing this. Okay.
Right.
Some colleges do it, some don't. That's important. And the other thing I want to say, and I don't remember last week, what did we call myself? Mark the Miserable, Mark the Miser. I was like a bearer of bad news. I kind of feel like this is going to be another one. This is not going to go away.
Right.
If anything, it's going to increase.
Right.
And when I have conversations about it, and the reason for that is you really can't do your job in admissions if you don't know how to predict who's going to come. And when we've read these crazy stories about, I applied to 156 colleges, I applied to 137, I applied to 79, the more students, I mean, we're caught in this vicious cycle. People hear that it's hard to get in, so they apply to more schools. Colleges find out you're applying to more schools, so then they have to come up with sophisticated ways of figuring out who's serious about them. So what does that mean? They go to early decision more, or they take more students from early decision, or they implement early action and they prioritize who applies early action versus regular admission, or they come up with sophisticated labyrinth ways of tracking demonstrated interests. So, like, that's going to happen because it is basically impossible to do your job in admissions if you can't predict who's coming. I just heard about another. It's really funny when I was at this conference, and one of the people I met was the vice president of enrollment at the University of Michigan. And she shared the story of how when she came to Michigan, the year before she got there, they had under-enrolled by 800. Or 2 years before she got there, they had under-enrolled by 800. The year before she got there, they over-enrolled by 800.
Wow.
Okay? And they had to, like, at the last second purchase, I can't remember, I don't want to say it right. It wasn't a hotel. They had to purchase apartment complex, I think it was, to house all these people. And so that basically led to, okay, I think we need a professional to bring in here and figure out what we're doing here, because this isn't working. And so it doesn't work for a college to not know who's coming. And one thing that I think maybe a lot of people don't know is colleges don't know how many schools you apply to. Did you know that, Anika?
I guess I kind of sort of knew that, but I thought maybe it was reflected in something somewhere.
Because you might think with all this data and everywhere, like somehow maybe they kind of know. They really don't know.
Okay.
And so, like, when they hear these stories of, crazy number, it's not even really just the stories. It's more watching their own yield rate go down from year to year.
Right.
That forces them to have to implement ways of trying to figure out who is going to come. And I just really don't see any solution for this. I thought for a while that somebody is going to do something like on the Common App, they're going to get a whole bunch of schools, but then they'd probably have an antitrust violation. But to agree, like, okay, check the box if you apply to like 8 or less schools or 9 or less schools or something. But there'd be such backlash from the public about that.
Right.
And also some people would lie, but nobody's wanted to go there. But I'm kind of surprised somebody hasn't tried something like that, because I know that they're trying to figure out who's trying to come. And are you one of these people? Because if you applied to 50 schools, I don't need to waste my time on you.
Yeah, it's tough. I can see that. I can see both sides. But like you said, it's here and it ain't going nowhere.
And I see both sides too. Like, I totally see both sides. Like, when those admission deans, when they said, I feel bad, I feel slimy to me that we're tracking kids this way. Like, I genuinely feel bad about it. Like, they didn't feel so bad that they weren't doing it anymore.
Right. As I continue on my data
Yes,
mining
because they're like, I feel bad, but the information is really helpful. I mean, one of them said to me, like, when you can go in and you can see the kid has been on your website like once a week for the last 6 months, because they literally get a printout. Some schools literally print a report that goes into the admission file that shows your online activity that they can look at. And one admissions director said to me, it kind of says something, tells me something, versus we've talked about the stealth applicant, right? Who just shows up and nobody even knew this person could have lived on Mars. Like, who in the world are you?
All right.
All right. I think enough about that. But I mean, for some people that don't know this is going on, this is probably surprising.
Yeah. Surprising and prevalent.
Hey, it's part of living in the technological age of big data. By the way, I don't know what to say. Data. I'm going to go back and forth. Like,
you say tomato, I say data.
There you go.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, friends, moving on. This is the part of our podcast where we go chapter by chapter through a book I wrote called 171 Answers. We snip out a couple of little key tidbits here and there and talk about them. So, 77th chapter in the book, which, by the way, corresponds with our episode number. So we're on episode 77, says, how do admission offices evaluate applicants who are transferring from one college to another? Anika, you read the chapter. What say you?
Well, I'm not exactly sure why, but I was kind of surprised by the policies or by the process, I guess, being just as competitive as a regular applicant. I shouldn't have been surprised, I don't guess, but I was. And the fact, I mean,
so you thought it might have been easier to come in as a transfer?
I did think that.
And why would you think that?
Because they've already been admitted somewhere else, so they've already been through the process, and so that kind of, I guess, I would speak to, they've already made some round somewhere. So if you're coming from a certain college, and I know my college is similar to that college, then you must be someone that we kind of want and just come on over, if that makes sense.
Well, I kind of can see how you would think that way. It's kind of like, for example, one of my students who I worked with, I recruited him. I was his advisor for 4 years and did his college placement, and we played golf together and everything. But he worked for CNN, and he had 3 promotions for CNN. He's recently left CNN, and it's so easy for him to get jobs because, like, people look at it like, oh, CNN vetted you,
Mm-hmm,
and
right.
so you're kind of looking at it that way.
Exactly.
Like, people would see that.
Yep.
But the reasons why that's not true, why it doesn't apply here, lots and lots of reasons. One is different schools have different levels of selectivity, so it's not necessarily comparing A to B.
Mm-hmm.
Different schools are looking for different things. Different schools, they like to bring in students in their freshman class that can be there for 4 years, so that means there's less openings. Right? They try to fill up their class as much as they can. Now, I'm being a little general here because we do have non-traditional schools, right, that have lots of older students and lots of transfer students. I'm mostly referring to your more selective schools here, but moderate to highly selective. And then here's another thing that I think maybe you hadn't thought about, Anika, is when a student wants to transfer, it can raise the question, is the problem that the fit just wasn't right, or is the problem the students are malcontent and they're not going to be happy here either?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But what else did you, what are some other takeaways from this chapter?
Well, I mean, you list out a couple. I mean, you list out, some things to do in the process, but some of the key, I guess, technical points that were surprising to me is that, number one, the Common App has a transfer application. Okay, didn't know that. And that you can go to the common data set and see the transfer acceptance rates for those, for the school that you're looking to transfer to. And you make the point that oftentimes that it's low. Which is scary because, again, it goes back to, man, they already went through this. Like, it's starting, like you're starting from scratch, doing it all over again. And just to dig into some of the things that you advise a student to do as they're going through the process. One of them being, in the application or in your essay that you're doing, don't talk down on your current school. I think that's so easy to do. That could be easy. It'll be easy for someone to speak about what they don't like about their current situation. So that was really good advice. One that was really scary to me, and it would, for the ones that require teacher recommendations for transfers. Yikes. I mean, can you imagine being at one of these diehard school spirited, high spirited schools? I can imagine a student going to a teacher and say, "Hey, I want to leave y'all and go somewhere else. Can you write me a teacher recommendation?" I mean, that would seem so awkward to me. But the fact that you have to do something like that, it's just, I don't know. It was kind of nerve wracking reading that. So,
all right. So let me say a couple of things. So you've lit my fire on many, many topics here that I want to know. So the first thing I would say is extremely important. When we talk about it being harder to transfer in, that is so case by case.
okay.
There are schools it is easier. There are schools that have lots of transfer spots. So the bottom line with this is it's going to be extremely school specific. Okay, that's one thing to, there are schools where transferring in is easier than getting in as a freshman. So I don't want the message for everybody to be that it's so much harder.
Okay.
It is definitely in general harder for more selective private schools. Like they tend not to have as many spots, but
Right.
it's still case by case. So that's the first thing. Common data set is a gold mine on transfer. So if you search for a school, you put the name of the school in Google, you put common data set. Not every school has common data set, but a lot of them do. And this is agreed upon body of statistical information that a number of people provide. U.S. News, Peterson's, they all agreed to compile and provide this data to present schools in a systematic and unified way. So Section D of the common data set is all about transfer applicants. And it has so much helpful information in there. It will, first of all, it says, do you accept transfer students? Okay. And then if you say yes, it gives the actual number by gender, how many men and male and female applicants they had, how many were admitted. I pulled up Davidson, Anika, just because, we both had kids graduate from Davidson.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually looking at it. So Davidson had 146 transfer applicants last year, 71 male, 75 female, and they did admit 24. So that is an acceptance rate of like maybe, similar to their acceptance rate. That's maybe 17% acceptance rate. I think this year acceptance rate was 18 or 19. So their acceptance rate is pretty similar to their normal rate. But this is just one school. Then it tells you, do you accept them for the fall, the winter, the spring, or the summer? Okay. Then it gets into how many credits you need to have, minimum number of credits that you need to have. Do you have a policy on minimum number of credits that you need to have? And then it asks what items are required in the transfer application. Is a transcript required? Is an essay or personal statement? Is there an interview required? Is there standardized test scores that are required? Do you have to have a statement that you're in good standing with your institution? Is there a minimum GPA that's required in order to be considered for transfer? What are the deadlines? What's the notification date? Okay, so and I'm going to stop there. But those are just some of the things that are included in the in the common data set. So common data set is an absolute gold mine if you're considering transferring. What else did you said something else I wanted to comment on? Do you remember? Anika?
Oh, wait. I'll turn my mic off.
What happened to you?
I keep flipping my mic off because I'm moving around.
Oh, okay. You flipped your mic off and went to sleep on me. What?
No, I forgot to flip back up. So,
So I wanted to comment on three things after you said something. One was I wanted to comment on, it's all institution specific. Then I wanted to go in a little more detail. Oh, I remember what it was. So you remember how you said I can't imagine going to a teacher and saying I want to transfer?
Yes.
So I think you're in private high school, middle school mode where it's a small little institution and they're going to be offended that you want to leave. These are big universities that people come and people go and they understand that. And there's lots of reasons why people want to transfer. You might want to transfer because they don't have you decided you wanted to switch majors and they don't have the major anymore. May want to transfer because you can't afford the school. You may want to transfer because it's a sad story, but it's a true story. One student I worked with, his dad was dying of cancer, and so he wanted to be closer to home. you know, you may decide you don't want to be this far away. So it's not an issue. It's not an incident like that where it's hard doing that, where they're
Mhm.
going to be so offended. What is an issue, though, is for schools that require recommendations. If you're one of these students that just sits in class and leaves and doesn't get to know your teachers, now you got a problem.
Mhm.
That's where it's,
A big one.
yeah. So that's where it's a problem. Anything else on your mind?
Nope. I just felt like those jokers are starting all over, and it makes me nervous having to do that twice. Yikes! I don't know.
Well,
Just me.
if it's not the right match, it's kind of like, I've had a couple of people that work, at KIP where they come and they realize really early on, like teaching is not for me. Being
Mhm.
it is not for me. And if you figure that out pretty soon, if for a lot of times I like to see a student go back a second year,
Mhm.
because one of the struggles I have with this is, okay, is this really just not the right place and you need to cut your losses and move on? Or are you just having problems adjusting, right? Because a
Mhm.
lot of times people want to transfer because they've never lived away from home, or they had this utopic worldview that it would be perfect, and maybe they have a bad roommate. And so that is always a challenging thing. Like, at what point are you quitting when you need to
Mhm.
just persevere and show some grit, versus at what point is this is just not really, this is not the right place for you, and move on. That can be a little bit challenging. The one thing that I think is really important we haven't talked about in this discussion is, when you are transferring in admission, a tremendous amount of the admission decision is going to be based on your college GPA.
Okay.
Your college GPA is just the dominant factor in whether you're admitted. Um, a lot of schools will have policies that, let's say you're transferring after 2 years, Anika, this
Mhm.
is in 2 years, 60 credit hours, that you don't need to show your high school transcript or your test scores. So they're literally making the decision off your college GPA.
Okay.
And so college GPA is going to be huge. By the way, you talked about the Common App having, they do have, not only do they have a transfer app, they have a brand new revised transfer app that's coming out, that's just came out. So, yeah, and the same things we've talked about before, Anika, apply. Some schools do it by the numbers, some schools do it holistically.
So, when is it too late to transfer?
Well, that's where Common Data Set will give you the deadline.
Mm.
Well, that's
No,
going
no,
to vary
no.
school by
No.
school.
I mean, like a junior in college. Oh my gosh, I'm 6 months away from graduation. Like
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah. Schools. There are policies in place where there are minimum number of credit hours that you need to
Mhm.
complete at that institution in order to get the degree from that institution.
Okay.
There, like a really common one is 40. You have to have at least 45 credit hours with us. That's a
Yeah.
common one. So yeah, you can't think, okay, I got 2 more classes to go and I want to get a degree over here, so I'm just gonna flip over here because you have more name brand. No, they're not gonna let you play them like that.
Okay.
Why does your mind always go there? Stuff like
Yeah.
that.
All natural. I can't help it.
Oh, it's all good. Nika, I can't tell you how much I look forward every week to doing this recording with you. I have so much fun on these. I do. I do. I'm like, oh, it's podcast time. This is going to be fun.
Mark, I have fun too, by the way.
Good. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right. Our question this week comes from Miss Nikki in Key West, Florida. And I'm going to read Nikki's comments and question because they're so nice. Thank you for your podcast. I have gained a wealth of knowledge from your podcast. Do you have any episodes that talk about students who graduate a year early and what to consider in this big decision? How do colleges and universities feel about students who graduate a year ahead of schedule from high school?
Thank you, Nikki, for your comments. And by the way, I'm jealous because you're in Key West and I'm not. I mean,
Right, facts.
I love the ATL, but I also like some Key West, Florida.
Ooh, very nice.
Oh, that's a nice place to live.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. It's pretty simple. Colleges use the application process to vote with their decision, what they think about you. So if they had any problem with you graduating early, then they wouldn't admit you. And so And most colleges won't have a problem with you graduating early. What they're going to do is they're part of their assessment, especially if they're holistic, is going to be doing an assessment of your social and emotional maturity, right? And whether they feel you can live away from home and when you can, you can handle um, being around slightly older kids. I'll tell you, so it's really not an issue at all because it's really, really common. And also, 1 year doesn't make that big of a difference at that age. It's one thing if you're going into a pre-K program and someone's 3 and someone's 4, or someone's 2 and someone's 3, you were 1 year and your life makes such a big difference at that age. But when you're talking about 18 versus 17, that's rarely going to be a factor. Now, they're going to be looking at your curriculum as long as you've taken the right courses, done well, have good grades, good recs, good testing. They will vote by their admission decision whether or not they think you're ready. That's really the essence of it. What are you thinking, Anika?
I think you're right. As always.
Not as always. Nothing's worse than when you say something on the podcast and then later you realize, oh, I said something wrong 6 months ago. That's bad. That happened on one thing.
You won't do that.
I did it once. I was that maybe more than once because I don't know I did it. But
you won't do it.
I know one time when I did it. No. But so that's really the biggest factor is the admission decision will be used to indicate to you whether or not they feel you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really that simple. And kids mature at different rates, right? So it's not so much about age, it's more about maturity.
Right.
Now I'll tell you where this is a factor. So with Nikki's question, it's really, really, really a non-factor. Honestly, it's more about your maturity and your academic level that you're at. What is a factor, and this is where you'll find schools have a lot different policies. Let's say Nikki would have said, I have a child that's 14 or that's 15 that's going to graduate.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are cases like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are people that are homeschooled. There are people that skipped multiple grades. And so that is where there's going to be a lot more scrutiny. Schools have different policies on things. That's going to be looking a lot more. Do we want a 14 or 15-year-old in the dorm? What level are they going to be at maturity-wise? That's where it can be potentially an issue. And once again, that's going to be, that's really going to be school by school. But 1 year, this was an easy one. We hadn't done a podcast on this, Nikki, but we have hopefully answered your question now.
Bye-bye.
Anything else, or you want to wrap it up and put a bow on it and call it an episode?
Let's bow this guy up.
I think it's been a while that we've done a little shorty. This is a shorty for us.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, if you missed part 1 of my interview with Greg Roberts, the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Virginia, strongly want to encourage you to go back and listen to it. In fact, Greg was, I thought, so astute in his comments that we turned his whole series into a 4-parter. And in part 2 today, what Greg talks about is why a large number of public schools do not do holistic admissions review. He also talks about the Varsity Blues scandal, and he talks about how it is impacting admissions. And he talks about different visions that different politicians have about what role public education should be and how that impacts decisions that colleges have to make. So listen and enjoy. Yeah, and when you look at sort of different admission models, you're doing holistic review, and Georgia Tech's doing holistic review, but a lot of the other publics don't do as much of a holistic review, I find. Do you feel that that's a reflection of their limited resources, or is that just, a decision that they're making strategically?
Well, I think it depends, and of course that's our fallback answer to most any question in admission. It's the most unsatisfying but popular answer that we can provide.
At least it's accurate.
Exactly. So what I'll say is I think that the reason schools do not have a holistic review in many cases is driven by volume,
Mm-hmm.
The ability to to read a file in that manner, given the large volume of applications at a school in the California system, makes it very difficult. And even if they do have a holistic review, some schools will have cutoffs or markers to determine which students get that secondary and more comprehensive evaluation. The other is, if you're an institution that is admitting 80% of your applicant pool, and you found that certain statistical criteria normally indicate some level of success at that school, then you probably don't need to have this holistic review. You're admitting most of the students who are capable of being successful just by virtue of their transcript or their test scores or something along those lines. When you start to look into schools where the admission offer rate is say under 50%, you're making fine distinctions between very good candidates. We are not making decisions as to whether or not a student will be successful, because a lot of the students that we're unable to offer admission to are very fine students that will be successful at schools like UVA. But we simply don't have the space given the applicants pool size. And so I think that the holistic review allows us to combine objective measures of evaluation with professional judgment and subjective measures that would allow us to take into consideration all sorts of different circumstances and life situations. It's funny, if you ask people about the college admission process, particularly now after the Varsity Blues scandal, I think people are suspicious. I think that they will say that it is, perhaps broken or unfair. But then if you ask them to, and we ask this question of ourselves, frankly, how are we going to fix it? What can we do to make it better and more fair and more transparent? I don't think the answer is ever, let's go strictly by numbers. Because I think folks realize that there's a lot that goes into a test score, or how could you penalize a student who's had some incredible hardships in the 9th grade but has overcome all obstacles to be successful and would be a fine candidate? And that's where the holistic review comes into play. We're able to use that information and make what we believe are sound decisions. It is not perfect. I would never claim it's perfect, but I will say that it is a process that is thoughtful and personal and managed by people who really do care and are trying to make the best and most fair decisions that we can possibly make, given the information that's provided.
Yeah, I'm completely sold on holistic review, but in terms of being the best method. But as you said, holistic review is human review, and with human review, you're definitely introducing some elements of subjectivity. Let's go back to the political pressures that public universities face. Anything you can share there? Unique political pressures, maybe that a public may have more so than a private. Sorry.
Well, I think a lot of it stems from expectations, expectations of legislators as to what a public institution should be. Should public institutions be merely training grounds for individuals so that they can get out and get a job? What is the value of a liberal arts education? I mean, these types of thoughts about higher education in general, and certainly publics, because they are funded partially by taxpayer dollars, really influence the types of programs, policies, and opportunities at public universities. And sometimes that is, that shifts with the political winds in a state. Conservative, liberal might have different views on higher ed. But so there are expectations coming out of state capitals on what college should be, and that impacts budget distributions and allotments for higher education. I mean, the legislators in the state have many, many constituents and demands, and there are times in the past where, at least in the state of Virginia, the higher education funding had declined significantly because there were budget deficits, or there are demands for roads or retirement and all sorts of things that legislators deal with. So I think that it starts there. I think that there's also an expectation of the residents of the state, of taxpayers who believe that they have contributed every year to the well-being of the state through their taxes, and that they deserve the right to attend a public school in that state. Fortunately, most states have many, many different types of public institutions, and often with declining demographics in some areas of the country, there are opportunities at most of the public schools. So I think for us, we work with the legislature. We talk to them about our plans. Of course, they might have specific ideas and thoughts about tuition setting or how we use our financial aid budget. These are the types of things that probably wouldn't impact the privates outside of their boards, their board of advisors, or in our case, we call them board of visitors. Lastly, I'll say that at public institutions, boards that really provide oversight and are very valuable to the well-being of an institution are politically appointed. And I know, for example, in Pennsylvania, I believe there's some that are politically appointed, but others are, there's a vote.
Mm-hmm.
But in the state of Virginia, for example, the governor appoints the board members, and they have a term limit. And so, if you're in a state where the governor's house changes parties,
Mm-hmm.
and the way it has in Virginia since I've been here, then the board members often are arriving with different political views because they're appointed by either a Republican or Democratic governor, and that can create some disagreement about next steps and where we should move forward. So.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 77 is the book The Blessing of a Skinned Knee by Dr. Wendy Mogel. Now, our regular listeners will remember that Susan Tree was on our podcast for a 4-part series on essay writing. And in the final episode, when I asked her what were the most impactful books she has ever read, this was a book that she mentioned. This best-selling book offers a practical, inspiring new roadmap for raising self-reliant, ethical, and compassionate children. In the trenches of a typical day, every parent encounters a child who's afflicted with attitudes like ingratitude and entitlement. And in a world where material abundance abounds, parents want so badly to raise children who will be productive, who will be self-disciplined, appreciative, and resourceful. None of us want a spoiled child with an attitude of ingratitude. But how do you accomplish this feat? The answer has eluded even the best-intentioned mothers and fathers who overprotect, overindulge, and overschedule their children's lives. What Dr. Mogel does in this book is she helps parents learn how to turn their children's worst traits into their greatest attributes, starting with stories from everyday parenting problems and examining them through the lens of the Torah, the Talmud, and important Jewish teachings. The Blessing of a Skinned Knee shows parents how to teach their children to honor their parents and to respect others. We'll now return to my interview with Gregory Roberts, Dean of Admissions at the University of Virginia. So let's hone in on that a little bit more. So when you've seen Republicans in control versus Democrats, does that have ramifications for your financial aid budget, for your overall budget? How much money they say is going to be allocated toward your school as opposed to roads, bridges, and something else? I mean, what are the ways in which you've actually seen that practically flesh itself out?
I haven't experienced those sorts of things, and I think that there's been a little bit more consistency in the state of Virginia over the past several years. And I will say that the board members who are appointed are all very committed to the university and have been very supportive and valuable. I'll give you an example, though. It could be views on, say, online education.
Mm-hmm.
A handful of years ago, with Coursera, and
Mm-hmm.
the big buzz was that there were going to be far more schools offering online education. Or if you're stepping your toes into the water here, how do you get started? How much should you invest in online education?
Mm-hmm.
It democratizes is the the process in some ways, because you can have folks who might not be able to financially or even physically be present for a 4-year undergraduate residential experience, and so therefore you're offering degrees to folks, like Arizona State.
Mm-hmm.
I hear something on the news, on the radio nearly every day, and they have a remarkable brand for their online education program. Purdue as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that what online education meant and what it could mean to higher education in schools like Virginia, there was widespread disagreement about that. And so that is an issue where, people will probably bring different thoughts to the table, and you have to respond and determine what is, what we recommend is what's best for the university. So I have not seen, I've heard conversations about things like, um, out-of-state financial aid funding, for example. If and this is less politically motivated, it's more philosophically. Should UVA
Mm-hmm.
be solely for Virginians, or should this be a place that has a broader national and international reach or visibility?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you marry? How do you blend those two? You have this important commitment to Virginians.
Mm-hmm.
The university was founded as a public school to serve Virginians, and you're proud of that, and in no way you would abandon that. But how do you blend that with your aspiration to be a university that is global in its reach and impacting not only Virginians but the world around us? These are some of the questions that often are discussed at public schools.
So, Greg, really appreciate you coming on our show. And I'll tell you, our regular listeners know this. I've got an undergraduate degree from Michigan State, and I was talking a lot of smack after we took down Duke this year. And I know you said earlier on that you're a big basketball fan. That's part of what drew you to Wake. So I'm being a real good sport here, having you on the show, because you guys took down the national championship this year in basketball. That had to be good times at the school.
Yep, there was high energy and excitement. In fact, it's funny you mentioned Michigan State, because when I read the blogs of the UVA fans, I think if there was one school we always feared, it was Michigan State, because of the defeat several years ago, and 2 years in a row, I
Yes, 2
believe,
years. I
at least two out
remember
of three.
that too.
Yeah, they were painful losses, but Tony Bennett is a heck of a gentleman and a man, and he represents the university exactly the way you would hope to be represented by anyone, much less someone who's as visible with an athletic program as the basketball team. But of course, people here were thrilled and overjoyed, and maybe they did it too good. They were too successful, because we ended up being over enrolled by 4 or 5%, and I attribute that to the visitability, success, and excitement of the men's basketball championship.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because, school after school after school that has success, especially in a major athletic program like a basketball or football, whether it's the Alabamas or the Butlers, or I've seen it at Michigan State, you experience a surge of applications the following year. I mean, it helped you with your yield this year. Are you guys having those type of conversations, and are you expecting to have increased volume as a result of your success?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the timing of the win, which was early April, of course, coincided with the decision deadline of May 1, and so that was also a period of time where we were welcoming thousands of students to the university grounds for open house admitted student programs. And
Oh,
I
nice
think whether or
timing.
not you're a sport fan, they couldn't help but sense the energy and enthusiasm and excitement. And I often joke that, I wonder what the shelf life is for introducing the University of Virginia as home of the men's basketball champions. I think it must be a year that I can say that in public before we have to come up with something else. But as far as application volume, I really don't know.
Yeah.
We've seen a pretty big surge the past few years, and so my hunch is, we might see a bump, but I think that it's not unrealistic to assume that the timing of the win impacted the decisions of some of the students who we had just admitted in the spring.
And I would say, I don't think there's any question about that, but good for you. I bow, I genuflect, I give you all the props, and you are right. I'm so impressed with Bennett, like how he handled losing as a 16 seed. That was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it was a great story.
What a great run.
Yeah.
I mean, the two games that you pulled out, the one against Purdue and the one against Auburn, I mean, I don't even know how you did it, but that was just meant to happen, I guess.
Yeah, that's what we think. You've got to be a little lucky, of course, and we realize that, but couldn't happen to a better group of kids and such a remarkable coach.
Next week in the news, 7 admissions officers share the things they never tell applicants. And we'll be in chapter 78 of 171 answers. And we're talking about whether families should hire independent college counselors. And next week's question asks how a student athlete that wants to play in college can get the attention of college coaches. And Mark moves into his third part interview with Dean of Admissions Greg Roberts in Understanding the University of Virginia. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.